We are here in the company of Mark Littlewood. Mark, very good morning to you.
Nice morning,
to
Mike.
see you this early in the morning from Popular Conservatism. A lot more popular than Keir Starmer is, I have to say that. And we've got lots and lots of headlines to get you through, most of which seem to involve President Donald Trump. The Mail goes with Trump blinks first. Trump would bet on a deal with Iran, says the Times. Trump to run the Straits of Hormuz with Iran, according to the Telegraph. World crisis is not over, according to the Daily Mirror. And Trump touts an end to diplomatic war in the Financial Times. The thing I find extraordinary, Mark, about this story that's happened overnight, where Trump has apparently agreed to do some kind of negotiation and some kind of settlement to get the Straits of Hormuz open again, is every single commentator and every single newspaper and radio station that I've been listening to and reading this morning seems to think that Trump's the one that's lying.
Yeah.
Because, of course, the Iranians never tell lies.
No, exactly.
I mean, the paragons of virtue.
This seems to be exactly where the British media have got to.
Yeah.
But Trump, look, Trump sometimes, can be a little bombastic and, stretch things a little. But if Trump is saying X and the Ayatollah is saying Y, I think I'd lean into believing Trump.
I think I would. I mean, let's not forget, it was only, 3 days ago when we were told that the ballistic missile prowess of Iran was no more than 2,000 kilometres. And then suddenly they land one over towards Diego Garcia, which is 4,000 kilometres. Yeah. And everyone went, oh, they told us they didn't have any of those.
Yeah, well,
people seem to have forgotten that was the last time they told a lie.
Yes, well, and, you'd expect them to, wouldn't you? You'd expect them to. So I don't know. Will this? I know you're running the poll on it, but
we are running a poll on it, which says this: who would you rather be in charge of the Straits of Hormuz? The Ayatollah, Keir Starmer, Peter Mandelson, or Tony Blair? Some people are saying it's a mad poll. It's a poll, right? It's asking for your opinion. If you don't wish to vote in it, you don't have to. But it's made up by our massive poll department here. They go through a series of measures before they ever put a poll out. Yeah. They test it, they stress test it, they make sure, like all good pollsters, that it's going to be something which will stimulate the comments on the
and
chat.
You can reassure viewers.
And of course, it has stimulated the comments on the chat.
You can reassure viewers and listeners, can't you, Mike, that the winner of the poll won't necessarily be given the Straits of Hormuz at the end of the programme.
Exactly right. Yeah, we're not actually going to say, well, if the Ayatollah's won it, then you can be in charge. I mean, Donald Trump is actually saying that he will share ownership and the sort of administration, if you like, of the Straits of Hormuz with the Ayatollah. So the poll makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I don't quite know how that joint sovereignty can work, but I guess if you can have an alliance between President Trump and the Ayatollah, maybe an alliance between Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage is possible after all at some point.
Absolutely right. And that's the other thing as well, isn't it interesting? I imagine that Trump's been sort of drawn to want to administrate the Straits of Hormuz when he saw that you can charge £1.5 million to every tanker going through it. Yeah. He probably wants a piece of that.
He's worked out it is way better than any toll road in America.
I mean, forget about I-95. As you go past Newark Airport, this is
the
where
ultimate
the money,
toll road.
This is where the money is. And people will say we shouldn't be making fun of this story, but quite frankly, it's now reached kind of ridiculous proportions. The oil markets came back a bit yesterday as soon as Trump said that he wasn't going to administer, the mother of all beatings on Iranian infrastructure because, in fact, he pulled the deadline, which was 11:45 last night, London time. So, generally speaking, the markets, I think, have recovered a little bit, which will be good news for an awful lot of people in the Western world who have got pensions apart from anything else, because I've given up looking at my pension as of about a week ago. But, I mean, I suppose the question is it possible for them to find some kind of settlement? If Trump is serious about it, then perhaps that's the only way it's going to end.
That might be right. And look, I'm in the vast majority of people who want there to be regime change in Iran. Yeah. But it looks damn difficult to bring that about.
I'd quite like regime change in Britain.
Yes, that would be. Yes, I agree. Sort of, similarly high level of priority. and similar proportion of press releases from the government that you can't believe are true.
Exactly.
So I hope there's regime change. But I mean, if not, would we consider what's happened some form of success? I mean, we've done nothing. The Americans and the Israelis have at least enormously degraded Iran's capacity.
There's a piece in one of the papers today saying that they may be down to their last 1,000 missiles in Iran.
Right, and what about their nuclear program? We'd probably put that back 2 or 3 decades.
I would think so.
So even if everything stopped now and the Americans just walked away, You might say, okay, well, we haven't managed to convert Iran into a wonderful capitalist democracy,
Yes.
but at least we've made sure they're not going to get nukes for a generation or two. That would be some form of win. But with Trump, right, you never know with him, do you? Because he keeps you guessing. You never know what he's going to do or say next. It's like, sometimes the best sportsmen and footballers are like that. They don't know what they're going to do next. So the opponents don't know what they're going to do next.
And also, if his end game is to get some kind of, peace in the Middle East and a safeguarding of Israel, safeguarding of the other Gulf states who don't wish to have missiles being fired upon them all the time, if this is the best way to do it, he'll get there by whichever means he can, won't he?
I think that's probably right. I mean, as I say, the problem with all of these wars, isn't it, is that you kind of always quite like how the movie starts, but it's very difficult to see how the movie ends.
Yes.
So,
greatly, you've got to wait around for the sequel.
And you've got to write there's bound to be it's the Middle East. There'll be a sequel coming along any moment. Yeah.
Well, a lot of people at the beginning of this war, and I still kind of struggle to call it a war because it's not really like a war in the sense of a traditional kind of war, is it? It's it's almost like a sort of a war of attrition.
Yeah, and there's not much. There's no infantrymen involved.
And there's no front line.
Yeah, there's
really.
That's right.
So I think in the traditional sense, it's hard to think of it as a war. However, people have said this has got all the feelings to it of the first Iraq war, where some kind of deal was done, but it wasn't really done properly, and so they had to go back, and this time they had to go in.
Yes.
And of course, I've been speaking to my friends in America, as I'm sure you have. There's nobody in America that wants boots on the ground anywhere near Iran.
And the argument goes, doesn't it, that in most cases, in nearly all cases, if you want regime change, it tends to involve boots on the ground. I mean, I think the only counter case to that is Japan at the end of the Second World War, but that involved nukes on the ground, right? So you may not want to go there. So look, a lot of it, which is also hugely unpredictable, is what's the potential of an uprising amongst the Iranian civilians? And even if there was an appetite to do that, are they equipped to overthrow the regime? So look, who knows? But let's hope it comes to an end. But the impact of this, certainly in the short term, probably in the medium term, is going to be pretty grim. I mean, okay, we're seeing petrol prices perhaps stabilising now, but they've shot up.
Yes.
And the knock-on effects of this to any economy are substantial because,
of course, anything from this point on, I mean, funnily enough, bought some petrol yesterday and it was 150.9 per litre. And the knock-on effect of that will be felt for the next couple of months, presumably in transportation costs, food prices, energy prices still going up. I see no sign of I know that it wouldn't work this quickly anyway, but if the oil price dropped yesterday, it hasn't dropped at the petrol station, and the government is still making an awful lot of money out of it.
Yeah, that's true. Overall, however, for dear old Rachel Reeves, this is going to be bad news. Inflation will tick up as a consequence of this. That means that interest rates are unlikely to fall because interest rates remaining a little higher is a good way of combating inflation. And despite the fact that they're clawing in money in fuel duty because the price has gone up, the knock-on effect on the wider economy is probably going to mean their tax receipts overall are lower. So this beloved fiscal headroom that they pretend they've got, if they had any of it, it's probably disappeared.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, Rachel, there were stories over the weekend which haven't come true yet, but probably will eventually. There was some kind of reshuffle in the offing that Rachel Reeves might be on the way out. And so might West Streeting. So we'll see whether or not Keir Starmer recovers himself enough to do that. Lots of pictures coming. 171.9 in Aberdeenshire, says Alan. Blimey, that's a lot. Is that just for ordinary unleaded? That's like 20p more than it is in London, which is pretty expensive. That's extraordinary. Lots of people complaining still about the poll. So let's do a poll update, because I think we need to do that, because lots of people are actually voting on it. As Mark said earlier, you must remember that despite the fact that the poll is doing well on our site here, who would you rather be in charge of the Straits of Hormuz? The Ayatollah's winning at the moment, as we thought he would, 52%. Keir Starmer, 10%. Mandelson, 10%. Blair, 28%. Amazing number of people would think that Tony Blair should be in charge of it. Anyway, keep those votes coming in. At the end of it, we don't mean to, to sort of hand the Straits of Hormuz to anybody in particular, as Mark pointed out. But let's have a look at what happened yesterday in Parliament, because Keir Starmer had to appear before a select committee to talk about many things, including his status on the international situation and the international law, and why he keeps changing his mind about what it is that British foreign policy is. Now, this is a guy, let's not forget, who is said to be a top lawyer. He's a man that knows everything there is to know about international law. In fact, international law is his watchword. Have a look at him trying to explain what the law is that tells him that he should now change the rules on what Britain does vis-à-vis defence or attack.
The things to do at the beginning.
And I just wanted to pick up on a point in response to Mr. Slaughter. You were talking about the legal basis for action in Iran, and you were very clear in the original position. On Friday, though, you gave permission for the US to use the UK bases to target Iranian forces that are, in effect, keeping the Strait of Hormuz closed. Can you just be clear which states under international law are being defended through that action? Is it as clear a legal position as you were outlining?
Well, it's predominantly our allies in the region, and the legal basis is the same.
Which particular states?
Well,
name some.
All of those in the region that we are not just allowing US bases to be used to defend, of our bases to be used, but also we've got our own capability and assets in the sky there. But the legal, I mean, if you step back from this, we had already said, for the purposes of the defence, collective self-defence of our allies, and in fact our people who are in the region, we will allow.
I think we're very clear about that provisional position.
Just to explain the legal bit, we will allow the US to strike Iran's capability to send missiles, essentially to land, to infrastructure, hotels, bases. What Friday did was to extend that to vessels in the region, and because the illogicality of strikes that hit hotels and then you've got vessels in the water nearby that needed to be protected under the same legal framework, exactly the same legal framework. So actually that was an extension of the original decision as the targets of Iran have changed. So the set of targets that we've authorised the basis to be used for has changed accordingly, but the legal basis is precisely the same as the original legal basis, and the logic actually is precisely the same as well.
Can you imagine any other leader of the world talking about a military situation in those terms?
Trying to get away with just putting forward complete word salad. So, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I think I could have explained it better than that, which is the Americans can use these facilities as long as the actions emanating from them are to defend countries A, B, C, D, and E, or our
but except
equipment
by their
somewhere.
nature, being using the British bases to launch planes which have got bombs on them, that is by definition an attack force.
Yeah, quite.
It's not a defensive force. A defensive force would be, remember the Patriot missile batteries that they used to have in the Gulf War?
Yeah.
You know, that's defensive, right? So you're sitting on your home territory, shooting down missiles that are coming at you, shooting at planes that are trying to bomb you. That's defensive.
Correct.
Dropping bombs on people isn't defensive.
Yeah.
I don't care which way you look at it.
I think that's right. And I saw some IDF statement as well recently saying that the Israelis were now going to take a forward enhanced defensive posture. Well, that's an offensive posture, right? So this idea that you can chop logic between an enterprise which is entirely defensive and an enterprise which is offensive, complete garbage. And look, he was tied up in knots.
But this is the problem with lawyers, right?
Yeah.
Because lawyers cannot actually define anything because they're too frightened to define it, in which case they put themselves inside a framework outside of which they cannot then operate. And somebody else pointed out something interesting, that whenever Starmer's lying and whenever, well, I mean, his lips are moving basically, but whenever he's struggling, he starts doing this with his right hand. Yeah. And he does start, and he kept doing that when he was explaining the
psychologists would say that's, you kind of cover your mouth in your face if you're
definitely sort of defensive stroke, not offensive. It's difficult to know. The next clip we're going to show you, in fact, we're working on a I know that so many of you hate listening to Starmer. We're working on a trigger warning for you, so whenever we play anything by him, you'll know it's coming. But have a look at this. This is the real Keir Starmer, right? This is what he's actually like. This is when he gets quizzed by Bernard Jenkins in the same select committee in Parliament about why we were not ready militarily for this particular action.
The chiefs of staff are saying we need to be ready for war. So when are we going to be prepared, and prepared for what?
We are finalising the investment plan. That sits with the Strategic Defence Review.
It smacks of an enormous complacency.
Well, this smacks of the fact that for years there was underinvestment by the last government, and the stripping out and following out of our armed copyright Ben Wallace, who was the Defence
I'm not
Secretary.
making a fuss.
Well, honestly,
I agree with Ben
14
Wallace.
years of underinvestment, 18 months for Labour government.
But take drones, for example.
We're picking up the underinvestment of your government.
I mean, how petulant and pathetic and ridiculous for a man who's supposed to be in charge of a country, for a man who's meant to be thick-skinned as a politician and has been leader of the Labour Party for quite some time. And he's literally having a hissy fit.
Don't you think he recognised almost instantaneously that his initial answer was completely pathetic?
Was absolutely
Bernard Jenkins, the chairman of the committee, says to him, right, okay, so when are we going to be ready for war?
Right.
And he goes straight into process points.
Yes.
Oh, well, the good news is I've got a committee looking at that very question.
And the committee's working with the working party.
And it's sitting with the committee.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's sitting, it's not moving along.
And the working party are looking at the budget. Yeah. Meanwhile, somebody's just shot you dead with a gun from over there.
Yeah. But process is being followed.
Process. Well, this is what happened with Mandelson, wasn't it? The process was followed.
It's all about process.
The process wasn't any good.
Yeah.
So now they're going to change the process. But meanwhile, Mandelson is busy, importing supposedly drugs, exporting secret files to a known paedophile from government sources.
But this is the whole way that Starmer thinks. Everything is about the process. The outcome is neither here nor there.
Yeah.
So he's not that bothered about whether we're ready for war or not. Yeah. He's just extremely bothered that the right committee is looking at the right proposals at the right time. And to use his words, those proposals are sitting with them.
Yes.
Well, that hardly suggests the great sort of leap forward or alacrity that we need to properly defend ourselves.
Well, all I could think of when I watched those two clips yesterday was a combination of Margaret Thatcher and Winston Churchill, and just imagining them sitting in that same kind of committee room, answering questions about an offensive action in either in the Falklands or in Normandy. And you can't imagine them saying any of those words, can you?
We've got a working committee looking into it. Can you imagine them saying that?
I mean, and man from Kernow said toys out of the pram. It's totally true. And it shows you that he's a man on the edge as well, because he knows that he has no authority. Tosser, which is fair enough. Thank you, John, for that. But he's a man who clearly has no authority over his own party. He has no say. I mean, he actually said, we are allowing the Americans to, they're not allowing the Americans to do it. He's been told to do it by Trump, and he's now doing it. He's got no sort of in with Trump. Again, they say they've been talking to the president, but they just don't really have a seat at the table anymore.
And I think
why would they?
Yeah, and the other, you can now tell. I mean, obviously his entire political career hangs by a thread. I mean, presumably,
well, it's over, isn't it? Really?
Presumably, the Labour Party will get rid of him in relatively short order. But my God, how utterly thin-skinned is he? I mean, that's the difference between a statesman and a prime minister. Yes. A statesman is not thin-skinned and will take a criticism and rebuff it or rebut it or explain what's being done.
Be a bit clever answering it.
Yeah, whereas he seems to be mortally offended if anybody actually asks him a reasonable question.
Yes.
Mortally offended, gets highly irritable.
And we've seen it, haven't we, in Parliament as well? Totally. Like Prime Minister's questions, when he gets asked a question. Do you remember when the Plaid Cymru woman got up and said something? And he made some really disparaging remark about her brains. So he's clearly one of these guys who can't take it. He cannot take any kind of criticism, which is a sure sign of a narcissist and a man who is completely and utterly out of his depth.
I would completely agree. That's becoming more apparent every day. It just needs to become completely apparent to Labour backbenchers, and then they'll throw him overboard, won't they?
Well, you would like to think so. The other ridiculousness of yesterday, of course, was the following up of the arson attack that took place at Golders Green. 4 ambulances from a Jewish charity blown up by what is now being described as an Iranian gang. Apparently some group has claimed responsibility, which the police have said they haven't yet managed to actually pin down. But they're still not calling it a terrorist event. They're calling it a hate crime. Right? Wes Streeting turned up. Keir Starmer didn't turn up, I don't think. Sadiq Khan certainly didn't turn up. But again, this whole kind of hypocrisy of all of these lefty Labour politicians and activists sort of saying, well, this is terrible, isn't it? Absolutely awful. Zach Polanski, no place in this world for anti-Semitism. Well, except you've been practising it for the best part of the last year. So why are you surprised? Well,
and for the Green Party, they're thinking on their conference of saying Zionism is racism. Absolutely extraordinary. Look, the other thing here is, if this group, which is then associated to the Iranian IRGC, that's the Revolutionary Guard.
Yeah, this organisation is called Harak Ashab al-Yamin.
And there's some offshoot or supported by IRGC, aren't they? And we have not even yet designated the IRGC as a terrorist group.
No, and why? Because the lawyers say basically we can't because it's run by the state.
Yeah, but the European Union has, right? So if a group...
So is the USA.
Yeah, but take the European Union, lily-livered lefties. Even they have decided to go down the route of calling these guys a terrorist group and with the prescriptions that apply. We apparently have not. To my mind, that's the acid test, right? If the intelligence from this is clear, that, and it seems to me pretty obviously a terrorist attack, right? I mean, ghastly, it's on a charity, on an ambulance, not some sort of military facility or anything like that, or even an obvious political target. But if the government doesn't now say, yeah, okay, on the basis of this new evidence, not that we should require any new evidence, the IRGC is a terrorist organisation. I don't care whether it's part of a state or not.
No.
Why? I mean,
no, but again, it's a legal nicety which has been sort of dreamed up by Lord Hermer and people like him who say, well, we can hide behind this. Because again, it's all about, as I always say, nothing to do with foreign policy, it's everything to do with not upsetting Muslims in Britain. That's what it's about.
Well, that has to end, doesn't it? I mean, we have made life increasingly intolerable for the Jewish community. We have afforded them no reasonable protection. We have not prescribed clearly terrorist organisations as terrorist. I mean, I don't want to go so far as say it's unsurprising that something like this has happened, but I guess it is unsurprising even if it is shocking. And all we're getting at the moment is expressions of regret. Well, all right, fine, but what is the accompanying action to that? And the answer appears to be nothing, because Hermer.
Well, let's see whether there's a pro-Iranian demonstration at the weekend in London. I would bet you a pound to a penny. There will be, and it won't be stopped. You know, they stopped the last one, except they only stopped them from marching. But they didn't stop them from assembling, and they didn't stop them from shouting death to Israel, death to America, and probably death to Golders Green.
And they didn't nick very many of them either.
No. No. Absolutely. Melanie says he's probably still upset Arsenal lost the final, which he was probably attending. Yeah, he might be. He might well be upset about that. But the point is he's upset about everything, Starmer, because you never see him smiling anymore. You know, he's got nothing to smile about, mind you, and I'm quite happy about that. But, you know, the guy is obviously losing it. He's obviously miserable as hell. And if he had any kind of self-esteem whatsoever, he would just resign.
Yes. And that, I mean, it's intriguing, isn't it, when you see what we assume to be the final days, the final weeks, the final hours of a political career. He has got that dead man walking look on his face and that intonation in his voice. And I just think if I was in his position, I would sort of choose the time of my own political death rather than leave it to others.
Absolutely.
That would be, you could exit with something approaching some degree of good grace. If you actually said, look, I've thought long and hard about this and I've decided after the elections in May will be an appropriate time for me to step aside for someone else. And you would leave with some degree of grace.
Because also,
at that
how
point.
about a little bit of honesty as well, which I know we'll never get from Starmer, but a little bit of honesty to say, look, you know, unfortunately, this job has proven to be much more difficult than I thought it was going to be, and frankly, I'm just not up to it, and I can't, in all conscience, continue. But instead of that, he turns up and says things like, I was elected to change Britain. And I'm going to continue to stay in post until that happens. Well, no, you weren't actually. You were elected because you weren't a Tory. You were elected because you were from a different party and you happened to be the leader of the Labour Party.
So I've always had a theory, Mike, when I've conducted job interviews and I've been the employer many more times than I've been the employee. You can always tell the failing candidates are those who fall back on word salad. And the good candidates are those who give a direct answer, even if it's a controversial one. And he now continually falls back on verbiage and word salad. You cannot get a direct answer from him at all. And that is the sign of a failing candidate who's not up to any job.
Only last Wednesday, at Prime Minister's question, 6 times he was asked, did you speak to Lord Mandelson before you appointed him as ambassador, knowing what you knew about his friendship with Epstein? And he didn't answer the question. He never answered it.
I've been banging the drum about this a bit, that it seemed to me that this was still PMQs, Prime Minister's Questions, doing its job because it exposed Starmer as someone who couldn't answer a straightforward question.
Yeah.
But I've now reached the conclusion that the Speaker of the House of Commons is not doing his job.
He's not doing his job.
And you are in contempt of Parliament, in my view, if you are asked a straightforward, direct question where you clearly know the answer.
Yes.
That you're not trying to trip him up on some unbelievable technical detail in the bottom of
It's
some
a yes
government
or no answer.
You know whether you've spoken to Peter Mandelson. Why will you not tell the House of Commons the answer to that?
Right.
And I think Lindsay Hoyle's got to grow a pair
He does.
and actually say, I do not understand why the Prime Minister has not given a clear answer to the question asked by the Leader of the Opposition. Please now provide one.
Please answer yes or no.
Yeah.
And then he should ask the question and say, did you speak to him or
Correct.
not? It's really, really easy. A couple of other super chats have come in. Let me just go back to those, if I may. You can send those in any time you like. Something wickedly says, Keir needs a cuddle from Zelensky. Well, he had one the other day. Maybe that's why he's upset, because he left early. I don't know. One from Ian, who says it's salad, croutons and Thousand Island dressing. Is it? Word salad, okay. Starmer resigned. He actually thinks he's doing a good job, says Jane. I know, that's the tragedy. He really does.
And this with reference to the live show, Mike.
And Cindy says, Pooch, can you book Paul McCartney on the show? Actually, we can do better than that.
Yeah.
We can do Lewis McLeod as Paul McCartney. He does a really good Paul McCartney, doesn't he? Yeah. But we'll bring you that, of course, on May the 6th, evening of. Let's have a look at a couple of other clips, though, because yesterday, you might not be surprised to know, Mark, that the media are up on their hind legs. All of them had things to say about the Arson attack overnight in Golders Green on the ambulances. This is incredibly Ed Balls talking on Good Morning Britain. I still can't understand why he's doing that job, but that's another story. But have a look at this, right? You'll be amazed at his line of questioning.
And when you see last week the Shadow Justice Secretary Nick Timothy singling out the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, for praying in Trafalgar Square in a Muslim group and saying that is wrong and shouldn't happen, isn't that the kind of intolerance and divisiveness which is causing problems in the Jewish community right now? Do you condemn that as well?
Well, look, I think that the Shadow Justice Secretary was going to a point which many people in this country feel about Islamist extremism. I won't get drawn into a debate on whether his words were right or wrong. We're here to talk about this anti-Semitic attack this morning on the Jewish community. But certainly, as you say, we need to be careful with our words. But as I say, there are people, including many in the Jewish community, who are worried about the spread of Islamist extremism that's running rampant across society. I'm a university student. Across my university, UCL, I see people every single day, not just mourning the death of the Ayatollahs and extremists and supporting terrorist groups, but actually radicalising others. And that is something which is worrying in public, and I think something that we do need to speak about, and we can't shy away from these discussions.
So Dov Foreman there, a student at UCL and a Jewish activist, talking about the dangers of the Islamification of Britain. Ed Balls thinks it's an appropriate question to ask, maybe they're justified in blowing up your ambulances because of what Nick Timothy said.
The chain of cause and effect in Ed Balls' mind is absolutely bizarre. Nick Timothy criticises Sadiq Khan, and the consequences, apparently, that provides an open door to anybody to blow up some Jewish ambulances. I mean, how on earth?
I know.
Even if you disagree with Nick Timothy's criticism, let's say you wholeheartedly disagree with it, what sort of person could possibly think that would provide any justification whatsoever to go and torch some ambulances?
Yeah. Well, do you know what sort of person? The producers at ITV. And because they'd have been feeding into his ear as well.
Well, I mean, it beggars belief, doesn't it? That because this is where we've got to, Mike, isn't it? That we can't apparently have a robust political debate about, for example, the impact of Islam on British society, for fear that people will then be offended and will then take these actions, which almost Ed Balls appeared to legitimise, to say that this is an inevitable consequence of Nick Timothy saying something on social media.
And also to kind of make out that almost Nick Timothy's words are worse than blowing up ambulances.
Quite.
Blowing up ambulances is understandable.
Whereas a criticism on Twitter of somebody, outrageous.
I know.
I mean, absolutely got this the wrong way round. It's a disaster. And they'll close down every part of public debate on this basis, that if somebody says something, which we can argue about the content of, right? Do we agree with Nick Timothy? Do we think he was bang on? Do we think he went too far? But the idea that those sort of concepts shouldn't be put in the public domain because they lead to terrorism. The terrorism is the fault of the terrorists, not the fault of Nick Timothy.
Yes, absolutely right. A couple of other stories to run through before we let you go. HS2, it was announced yesterday, is going to now run slower than trains in places like Southeast Asia, Vietnam, in India, for example, other what you might call developing countries. I wonder if we're really now in need of renaming HS2 because it's not HS anymore.
No.
It's just S.
Yeah, well, there was not even much speed at all.
Slow
It's just two.
Yeah, 2 miles an hour.
I mean, I just wonder, is this potentially the most ludicrous infrastructure project of all time? So you mentioned the comparison with India. I can remember about 10, 15 years ago, the India space program spent, I think it was £100 million getting an unmanned probe to Mars. Quite
there were a load of people clinging onto the outside of it.
If you'd only bought a second-class ticket, you'll cling onto the outside.
See how far you get.
So the Indians have managed to spend £100 million getting to Mars, whereas we in Britain are spending £100 billion getting to Birmingham.
Yes.
I mean, who's getting... Yeah, it's this project absolutely crazy. It should... And look, the minute that no private money came forward to support this, not a single cent, dollar or dime came forward to support this, we should have known that the whole thing was a complete fiasco. What an absolute waste of money.
It's a great sort of allegory for the state of the British public sector, isn't it? Because one, they went and bought a load of property and compulsory purchased people, made them move house. Now they're trying to sell them back to them because they're not actually running a railway line up there anymore. They made the Bat Tunnel where millions and millions of pounds was wasted because they couldn't disturb the bats inside of a tunnel.
Spent £500,000 for each bat saved. £500,000.
Incredible. And now they're talking about, originally they weren't going to run it into Euston. Now they are going to run it into Euston. So it's effectively running parallel to the line they've already got. Which runs reasonably quickly already.
I would have thought, my impression, the London to Birmingham service is about the best one on the present railway system. So the idea that you would invest whatever money you've got on replicating that line at virtually no additional advantage. What an absolute fiasco.
I know. I don't know who's responsible for it, and no doubt we'll never find out now.
I reckon it should be bailed out by dipping into the Parliamentary Pension Fund to cover its losses.
I think so. Absolutely right. Shocking state of affairs. Meanwhile, Ed Miliband's back in the news. Story in the Telegraph that he's basically being warned about gas imports. There's an organisation called, I think, the Offshore, UK Offshore or something like that, who are actually saying, I was listening to it on the way in, very commonsensically, well, if we actually drilled for our own oil and gas, we'd be a lot more secure with our own energy, and also we'd be able to contain the prices somewhat.
Well, and right at the top of the show, we saw a chat, didn't we, Mike, from somebody complaining about the cost of petrol in Aberdeenshire.
In Aberdeen,
you would have thought this should be the cheapest. We should be drilling just by there, and the transportation. It is ludicrous. We are leaving very valuable natural resources in the ground, not just petrol. I mean, how we haven't been able to bring fracking online in any size, shape or form is absolutely ludicrous, all to fulfill this mad fantasy, this economic unilateral disarmament of Ed Miliband's weird ideas about carbon net zero. It is a disaster for the economy.
But even now, he's still unconvinced, doesn't he? He remains absolutely and utterly wedded to this idea of net zero. He says that the reason why we need it even more now than ever is because of what's happening in the Middle East, because we can't be reliant on Middle East energy. Well, we don't need to be reliant on Middle East energy. We've got our own energy.
We've got our own, and we can access others. It is true that the cost of petrol will go up if you get a military situation involving petrol-producing countries or problems on the Straits of Hormuz. But all the more reason, I think, to exploit all the natural resources we have, which are substantial, and we are deliberately, maliciously, I would even say, because it is an entirely leftist ideological basis for it, leaving them in the ground and under the sea. Absolute madness.
Incredible. One for you as a football fan. I know you're looking forward to the World Cup, which is coming up later on in the summer. England's new World Cup kit is the most expensive ever. It soared at nearly double the rate of inflation. A new England shirt, if you wish to buy one for this World Cup, will set you back £134.99.
That's outrageous,
isn't it?
That is absolutely bananas. My team in the Championship, I think the shirt's 50 or 60 quid, and I consider that to be on the highly expensive side.
Yeah.
These are usually pretty feeble pieces of fabric.
Right.
You know, these are not exquisitely made, tailored shirts.
No.
Absolute rip-off. And look, especially if we want to get kids interested in football, how many parents can afford to buy their nipper a shirt
the
of
kids
that
version,
sort of price?
The junior shirt is $114.99.
Yeah, I mean, who's going to buy
what
that?
if you've got
for their
three kids? You're
Yeah.
going to spend 400 quid basically buying three shirts.
Complete rip-off. Don't bother buying it. Just wear a white shirt or buy a retro one.
Yeah, or just wear a Scotland shirt instead.
Yeah, yeah.
Which might be a bit cheaper.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Probably only a bit, I'm guessing.
I don't know. And finally, the Sun goes a different way from everybody else, as they often do. Barmy B bans Bob Monkhouse, which many of you will remember as a very, very funny man, very funny comedian. Some of you might be too young. But apparently, an episode of BBC's The Repair Shop was pulled after a TV production worker got offended by a sexist Bob Monkhouse gag.
Yeah.
And the gag is, I can still enjoy sex at 74. I live at 76, so it's no distance.
Yeah, can somebody explain to me what's sexist about that? It's a good joke.
I mean, it's quite funny, isn't it?
Bob Monkhouse is family entertainment,
Yeah.
right? There's nothing sexist or racist about any joke I can ever recollect.
No, I know. This is a new low, is what it says.
Yeah, so the person who was offended should have been told to get lost.
Yeah,
Absolutely
exactly right.
unbelievable.
Yeah. Here's some of his other jokes. With my wife, it was sex, sex, sex. Yes, 3 times in 35 years. I'm not saying my wife's a bad cook, but she uses a smoke alarm as a timer. Which is brilliant. My wife said, can my mother come down for the weekend? I said, why? And she said, she's been up on the roof for 2 weeks. Sorry.
Yeah.
We'll have to gag this show now.
He was a legend.
He was brilliant. Absolutely fantastic. Anyway, listen, you need a laugh in these difficult days. Bob Monkhouse was brilliant, says LTL. By the way, I've had a couple of people coming in from Cambodia this morning, one from Brisbane, a couple of people over in America. There was a guy in, I think, Tennessee yesterday who got in touch. So do get in touch and do keep telling us where you are, because I've got behind me, as you can see, there. There.
Anyone in South America?
We're still looking for anyone in South America. So that Venezuela, so we're talking Brazil, Peru, Chile, Argentina, anywhere down that neck of the woods, because we've got a big gap. And also anywhere in Russia as well would be good. But do keep coming. Mark Littlewood, thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Pleasure as always, Mike.
We'll see you again very soon, I'm sure.